presentation of about 40 to 45 minutes, similar to what I'm doing here. Those presentations were and still are invariably accompanied by PowerPoint presentations, where learners put most of the material, written material, on slides and then talk to the slides, mostly by pointing to the text, the prose, on that slide. This actually works as a means of learners being able to hide themselves from actually looking at an audience. They can take refuge within the slides. When they do look at an audience, it's often a tremendous ordeal for them, not only because they have to learn to move their eyes from side to side to encompass every learner, but also because learners who are listening to them are looking at their faces. And it's not often, it is sometimes the case that learners themselves bury themselves in their texts, even though they're on the slides, they're also written out as a way of camouflaging themselves from the ordeal of looking at their audience. When I took over the teaching in 2006-2007, I was painfully aware of these particular difficulties that learners experienced. So I got them together and told them that we were going to do something completely different. We were going to take a text like Hamlet, Animal Farm, but what we were going to do is we weren't going to do presentations on it. We were going to do a dramatic version of it. The learners' faces dropped. And then I said, what's going to make it worse is that I'm going to divide you into groups, and you are going to do one part of that text individually, in groups, in front of the rest of the class. Again, the faces dropped. This could be even worse. Learning dialogue in English and performing it in front of an audience. Laurence Hoda, what are you doing? And then I explained why I had chosen this particular activity. I was not interested in perfection of performance. I was not interested in great literary judgments or in correct English. What interested me more was the process of how that text was adapted, and how that process was a continuous one that went right through the semester. So, what I told them was that I was going to give them each a text, a piece of the source text, Hamlet and Animal Farm. Each group would have 1/5 of that source text. I also gave them summaries of the whole novel and invited them to be able to look at any particular material on the novel or the play that they could find online. I wasn't interested, as I said before, in worrying about exactness of adaptation. I just wanted them to understand the story. The learners themselves willingly accepted to do that activity, and then I asked them to produce their own versions of each act or each part of the story, written either in English or in Turkish. What I insisted, though, was that they should be produced collaboratively, in groups. One person couldn't do all of the work and the other two just sit there and watch them. The activity had to be 1, collaborative, and 2, negotiated. Negotiated means that when they had produced one draft of their piece, they had to look at the piece once, twice, thrice more, and then decide whether that piece was good enough or not. What criteria were they having to use for such judgments? I told them that each aspect of each part of the play they would perform in groups of 3, and they'd have to play every character. If one learner had to play 2 characters, so be it. If some of the dialogue and plot had to be done in summary and delivered by one learner, so be it. What I insisted on is that in the process of evaluation, Each learner worked out what they were going to do within their particular performative activity. Once this had been established, there was a lot more discussion amongst the learners to decide whether the text that they had produced would be suitable, not suitable to me, but suitable for them. Finally, I decided to make their task easier by suggesting that although they were doing English literature texts, they could bring in local cultural material if they so wished. My suggestion was to use anything associated with a popular Turkish cinematic form called Yeşilçam, a B-movie type of filmmaking that flourished in the 60s and 70s. Films were made in 3 to 4 days, often on no budget at all, with the actors often playing the same role from film to film to film. The actors became really big stars, so big in fact that when they visited small cities as well as major cities, they were mobbed. Even now, the Yeşilçam films are regularly shown on digital television, and although our learners weren't born in the 70s when the Yeşilçam stars flourished, they know exactly who the stars were and what they did. And what I said was that you can make Yeşilçam versions of Hamlet and Animal Farm. The only stipulation is that there should be at least some kind of connection between the characters in the source text and the Yeşilçam characters. Learners absolutely jumped at the task. The chance to be able to wear big moustaches like the baddie, to wear grey wigs like the father, to be able to have young women in white dresses, and also to intersperse the extracts with pieces of cartoon violence and shouting and exclamation. This was the kind of thing that they were so familiar with that the task itself of producing Yeşilçam versions of Hamlet and Animal Farm became something thoroughly pleasurable. As far as the scheme of work was concerned, I had 12 weeks in which to operate. I decided that after the few introductory weeks where learners had worked through the texts, produced their own versions, they were then entirely free to work on their versions as they so wished. They could produce Yeşilçam material, they could produce films, they could choose their own costumes, they could produce filmed material on their smartphones, which they could use as a backdrop to performing live. They could do whatever they wished. My role would be not to be someone who advised them what to do, but something akin to a coach, going round the classroom, often in a fairly quiet way, and advising them or giving them suggestions, quiet suggestions, that they might reject or accept depending on what they wanted to do. Each lesson was entirely free. I just came into the classroom and said, "You know what you're doing, let's get on with it." Interestingly, this was an extremely loose form of teaching, something that they were not really accustomed to. But interestingly, they adapted to it extremely well. The chance to be able to discuss material amongst themselves in Turkish was willingly embraced. The chance to be able to dress up in costumes of their own making and of their own choosing was also something that was willingly embraced. And to be able to work mostly on their own, with the teacher encouraging but not advising, was something that really had not been experienced before. The entire semester became, I won't call it a riot or anything like that, but became an extremely free occasion where learners wandered around the classroom, went into other classrooms if they should so wished, went outside to do their own filming if they so wished, or filmed in offices of other teachers should they wish to involve them in their particular projects. The whole concept behind this particular scheme of work was to empower learners and to make them realize that adaptation, in the traditional sense, did not involve just sitting at a desk writing down a different version of a text into a play or a film, but involved many, many other skills of filming, of negotiation, of conversation, of creativity, and of putting the finished product together in a form